Hey, how's it going everybody? My name is SockBot, and today I want to talk a little bit more about the Dreams beta. Now, I know the beta's over, I know we're moving on to rumors and speculation about the full game, but I'm going to talk about some things that I thought were missing from the beta, or more specifically, some things that I think should be in the final game if they're not already slated to be released. Now, I'm not perfect, I may have just missed some of this stuff, it may be available in the beta and I just didn't find it, so feel free to let me know if anything I say is already in there, and I can just take a deep breath and calm down about it. But I also want to say that this is not to hate on Media Molecule at all. I think they did a great job with this beta release. I think, minus the issues with beta codes that we ran into, the beta itself was very well made and had a ridiculous amount of content for something that was completely free to all of us that played it. And praise for that. But I spend most of my videos praising Media Molecule, so this one is going to be a little more magnifying glass to define lines and specific things than most of my videos. So if you're interested in that, please stick around. Maybe like the video and subscribe if you want to see more. But more importantly than any of that, let me know if there's anything that you found missing from the beta, whether you played it or just watched videos on it. If there's anything that you found missing, well, one, maybe I can say, hey, it was actually there, you may have just missed it, or maybe I can be like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yes, I would like that added to the final game. And hopefully some of these things maybe get over to Media Molecule so they realize things they missed or things they thought weren't so important that we think are a little more important. So, starting off, I want to talk to people that specifically are looking to play a lot of levels within Dreams, and issues that I had playing things and searching for things, more specifically myself. So if that's what you're interested in, you can watch this section, and then if you don't plan on creating it all in Dreams, you can just leave after that, so I don't have to waste the rest of your day, because I'm sure you got important things to do later, and I don't want to get into that sort of time commitment with you unless you want to be there. So, I don't know where that accent came from, but let's start with play mode. So, I want to talk about the tagging system. It's not a super interesting topic, but it hit me every time I was trying to search for something, and it was very frustrating to me. So with Littlebigplanet 3, we actually had a great tagging system, and I realize it's not a Media Molecule game, but it is their property, or it was their property, so I think it's fair to make that comparison. Within that sort of system, we had a really good tagging system that lended itself to looking for like the top levels of these specific tags. For example, we had the top shooter platformer levels, and that was a whole section that I found that I absolutely loved, and it was pretty well done. Now, obviously we have a very similar tagging system within Dreams. We can search by multiple tags, which is great. You can look for things that are one player and are adventure-based, but the issue is that within Dreams, we have such a wider breadth of content that it's just not the same system that we need. What we could use is a tiered system, where, for example, you can say you want to search for movies that are under the category of action, that are under the category of short film, for example. And that tiered system allows you to only find movies, as opposed to you searching movie, or cinematic, I think is one of the tags they had, along with action, which is going to give you a slew of other things, for example, short things or assets for movies that are not necessarily full movies as you were looking for. Another example I would get is trying to search through the horror category combined with action and finding a bunch of things that I did not want to find. So yeah, I think a tiered system would work really well. Give us the option to search for movies or songs or some kind of orchestral movement if that's what you're looking for, or levels or scenery or assets for levels or scenery for movies. Those tiered systems seem to be the best option going forward, and the fact that it is just searching for everything equally is quite frustrating, because, you know, cinematic horror could refer to a character, it could refer to a level, it could refer to a movie, and, you know, that's a pretty wide breadth when you're just looking for one thing in particular, especially if you're trying to look for it as a creator who just needs that one darn asset for your level that you just don't have the time to make. So, speaking of assets, I want to talk about something in between, you know, create mode and play mode, that sort of intermittent period, and that has to do with what they call remixing a level. Now, when I hear that phrase, what I think of is taking someone else's level, for example, an action horror level, and being able to copy it to my Dreamverse and then remixing it and giving it my own twist. For example, taking the exact same level design and changing the character and scenery to be something more bubbly and happy and still incredibly bloody and violent, because I think that would be hilarious. And to me, that would be a remix. What they consider remixing a level, or as far as I've found what they considering remixing a level, it has to do with taking someone else's assets, just the assets alone, and using them within your own level. To me, taking someone else's character and making a whole level around that character would really make it my level with character designed by this person. And that makes more sense to me in terms of the phonetics of the whole thing. But that is not a remix, in my opinion. And obviously, everything that I'm talking about here is all on the assumption that we credit the original authors with everything they have. But so far, I have not been able to find a way to copy that level and remix it in the sense that I would consider a remix. That ability would also, allow us to look at the level and see not only how the character works in that level, like we can do right now by searching for it and copying it to our own level, but it would also let us see how that character interacts with the level. So for example, if there's tags and various other things that are not internal to the character, that only really make sense when you see how they interact with the level as a whole, we would be able to see that by looking at the entire level as opposed to just the character. And it would be a lot more streamlined to understand how somebody managed to make this level using that character and using that scenery together. So that's just something else I wanted to ask for, but moving on to create mode specific things, and this is going to get pretty darn specific, I want to start off with something that I've actually spoken to a few of you about, and that has to do with changing the opacity, or opacity, whichever word you use, for objects and sculptures in general. Now I remember they streamed about this and they answered the question of, how can you tweak the opacity by saying that you can't. And this was a while ago, and honestly, maybe I misheard, but so far I have been unable to do that myself. And that's pretty weird, because you've been able to do that in Littlebigplanet since Littlebigplanet 2, which, again, is a game that Media Molecule worked on. Obviously, I understand there's a few reasons why this may be the case. For example, changing the opacity of something and making it animate as something moves through it, I'm sure requires a lot more horsepower than just making that completely opaque and making whatever part of the character goes inside that section disappear. And I understand that that could be more difficult, but there are so many uses for this that even if it does drive our thermometer up significantly, I think it would be incredibly helpful. You have the obvious one, which is glass, being able to create some sort of glass, and then other things like water or like weather effects or a bunch of other, ice, anything that is interactable or pass-throughable, if that's a word, that is not completely opaque, but we're going to need that kind of tool. And again, the fact that we had it before and now it's kind of been taken away from us to some extent, I realize it's a new game, but as a creator coming from Littlebigplanet, it's frustrating. And I wish that, based on the amount of people that have asked for it, Media Molecule realized how important it was to us and would just be able to add it. Now with most of these things, I realize that this is somewhat possible within the game as a whole. For example, if you wanted to create glass, you could create that block of glass, make it impassable so that you can't walk through it like you can't normally walk through glass, and then create flecks around it to make sure that it looks kind of solid, like it looks like something's there, and then make the impassable material completely invisible. And you can do that. You can make things completely invisible, but as far as I can tell, you can't make it half visible, and that's a lot of steps to go through just to make a piece of glass. Another example would be for water, and this was something I was trying to do recently. Being able to swim is definitely possible. You can create a completely invisible material that allows your character to move without gravity and allows their animations to change based on the tags attached to the material. But then you still have to add all of these flecks and an outline to the water to show them where the water starts, and all of these sorts of extra steps, when for a basic water material, you could just make it semi, see-through, and that would solve the whole problem and be a lot easier than going through all of these different steps for the same result. Again, it is still possible, it's just like, why not? So moving forward from that, and this is something that I found myself consistently missing from Littlebigplanet. Again, I know it's growing pains, but this one in particular is something I know I'm going to run into a lot, no matter how long I've been with the game, and that has to do with hiding individual objects. In Littlebigplanet, you could hide an object by hitting L2 or R2 or something by hovering over it. And I realized that a lot of our controller mappings are taken up because there's so many different, more controls in this 3D space than we needed in Littlebigplanet. But the ability to hide just one object to get behind it and work on something that it was covering up was incredibly useful. Obviously now you can fly around, go over to it, or if you have a cave, for example, you can just fly into the cave, or alternatively, you can group everything you want to work on together and then scope into that area. So yes, I know the workarounds for it, but all of these things just take so much extra time to do, as opposed to just being able to hit a button to hide a specific object, and then hit another button, obviously, to show all hidden objects. But it's just a weird option that doesn't seem to exist, and unlike the opacity tweaker, I'm confused as to why it doesn't. It seems like something that wouldn't be that hard to add. But, you know, again, I'm not a game designer past what I've done in Littlebigplanet and Dreams, so I wouldn't know. Just my suggestion. Now, I have two things left. One is I'm sure it will be in the final mode, but just isn't yet, and the other is please, this would be awesome, but definitely not necessary. So the first one has to do with individual tutorials for each tool. Now, I know we have these big tutorials that cover how to create scenery, how to use the different animation tools, but when we had individual tool tutorials in Littlebigplanet, and I know I'm making a lot of references here, it was incredibly useful for going through piece by piece. So for example, if you knew you had to use one specific tool, like the tag system within Dreams, you could go into the options of it and watch a simple video or do a simple tutorial on how to use just that one tool without having to find which tutorial it was involved in and go through the whole tutorial to get to the point where it's involved. And in addition to that, within Littlebigplanet, being able to watch these specific tool tutorials showed us how we could use those tools even if we hadn't intended to use them in the first place. So for example, I didn't know what the selector was, and I never found myself needing one until it was added in Littlebigplanet 2. But watching the tutorial and seeing the different, options that I had to use it, I ended up using it in a different puzzle in another one of my levels. And so it kind of inspired me to use this more advanced tech that I hadn't really even cared about or even thought about. Again, it's a small use for it, and I think they may be working on this for the final game, who knows, but it would be incredibly useful to me. Now, again, this last one is really just a wish, but being someone who really likes 2D games and who loves, Mortal Kombat and Celeste and Super Mario Brothers, all of these modern games that are being made in 2D, I would love a mode that's dedicated to making 2D levels. Something that locks the camera at the front of the level and maybe allows you to move around a little bit just to kind of peer behind things would be incredibly useful for creating these things, because one of the biggest issues that I have in this game is actually creating straight lines. I understand we can use the grid system, but going back and forth between using the grid, creating something, and not using the grid offers a lot of places for error, where, for example, if I'm placing the platform but then happen to move the grid slightly, and then I place another part of the platform, I'll have to go back into that, look at it sideways, and realize that I have this entire section of the level which is not aligned with the beginning of the level. And in a 3D platformer, that doesn't really matter, because obviously the character can move in 3D, but in 2D, it's really important that everything is aligned perfectly. Again, this is possible with the grid, and it is possible to do, but it is very frustrating to have to realign your camera as you're creating at the front of the level every single time you want to continue creating. So giving some options for people that want to create stuff in 2D would be very useful. I'm sure there's a slew of other things that I'm not thinking of to add to this mode, but leaving that option maybe in the pause menu, or maybe giving it as an option when you're going to create a level, would be super nice, and something that I would really like myself. But hey, maybe I'm alone. Maybe 2D is just old school and is only meant for nostalgia, but I would love to argue that in the comments down below. So if you guys disagree with any of this stuff, or if you think I'm just missing all of this and it does exist, let me know, because I spent a while looking for it, but I'm not perfect, and yeah, could have missed it. But yeah, if you like this video, please leave a like down below and subscribe if you want to see more. But I'm just going to end the video here because I'm more excited to see what you guys have to say rather than to continue speaking what I have to say. And also, this is like my 4th time filming the video, so I'm exhausted. Alright, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Goodbye! Oh, that was a big crunch. Bye, guys.